It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon in suburban Orlando. On September 14, 2009, twin brothers Alex and Liam Carter, both 13 years old, left their middle school at 3:15 p.m. sharp, like they always did. They were seen laughing with friends, backpacks slung lazily over their shoulders, pedaling their bikes toward home, a familiar 2-mile ride through tree-lined streets. They never made it. The twins vanished without a sound, without a witness, without a single clue. That evening, when the boys didn't return home by 4 p.m., their mother, Mary Carter, grew uneasy. She called her husband Robert, who was still at work, and asked if he'd heard from them. He hadn't. By 4:45 p.m., Mary was pacing their porch, eyes darting down the road. She called neighbors. She called the school. Nothing. At 5:20 p.m., she called 911. What followed was one of the largest missing persons investigations in Florida's history. Helicopters scanned the skies, search dogs combed the trails. Volunteers, hundreds of them, fanned out across the city, canvassing woods, parks, and drainage canals. Police worked tirelessly, knocking on doors, reviewing footage from nearby businesses, and issuing Amber Alerts that quickly spread across state lines. Everyone was looking for the Carter twins, but days turned to weeks, weeks into months, and still, nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Their bikes were never found. Their backpacks never recovered. Not a single item of clothing. It was as if the boys had been swallowed by the earth, and just like that, fear settled over the neighborhood like a storm cloud. Parents started walking their kids to school. Stranger danger talks became routine in classrooms. The carefree innocence of Orlando's East Side evaporated. If you're already drawn into this chilling mystery, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into true stories like this one, stories that linger, haunt, and demand answers. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end of this one. Back in 2009, detectives were baffled. Alex and Liam had no history of running away. Their grades were solid. No signs of abuse or neglect at home. They were polite, well-liked, inseparable as twins often are. Mary and Robert were respected in the community. No financial issues, no domestic disturbances. The home was clean, stable. So what happened? One neighbor, Mrs. Fernandez, claimed she saw a white van near the school that day, a detail that sparked immediate concern, but the description was vague and the lead went cold. Another tip suggested the boys might have been spotted near Lake Jesup, but searches of the area turned up nothing. As the first month passed, the story faded from national headlines, though local news continued to follow it. Memorials sprung up around their school, a bench dedicated to them, ribbons tied to bike racks. Their classmates, now suddenly conscious of mortality, left handwritten notes and folded paper cranes outside their lockers, which were eventually sealed shut with their names etched in brass. By December, investigators were reviewing every inch of the initial search, re-interviewing friends and teachers, even consulting psychics out of desperation. 1,000 tips had come in. All of them led nowhere. For Mary Carter, the silence was unbearable. Every night she sat at the boys' shared desk, her fingers tracing their notebooks, whispering prayers no one could hear. She kept their room untouched, as if waiting for them to walk back in, laughing, apologizing for the prank. For Robert, the pain came out differently, stoic and quiet, burying himself in work, drinking more than he used to, refusing to talk about them unless absolutely necessary. Everyone has a breaking point, but the Carters refused to break. Not yet. 15 years would pass before anyone uncovered a single clue, but in that moment, in 2009, it felt like time itself had stopped. 2 lives vanished into the Florida heat, leaving only questions behind. And the worst part? No one saw it happen. The Carter household was no longer a home. It had become a museum of grief. Mary Carter stopped cooking meals. She stopped answering calls. Her days revolved around sitting at the edge of the couch, staring at the front door as if willing it to open. She played old voicemails from the boys on repeat, the sound of their voices both a comfort and a wound. In the kitchen, the calendar still showed September 2009. She refused to flip the page. Robert, once the steady hand of the family, drifted into silence. He worked late hours and spoke less each day. At night they slept in separate rooms, not out of anger, but exhaustion. Grief has a way of pulling people apart, even when they're holding on as tightly as they can. On the boy's birthday that November, Mary baked 2 small cakes, just like she had every year, chocolate for Liam, vanilla for Alex. She placed lit candles on each, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, and whispered their names. She never blew them out. The community rallied in those early months. Vigils were held weekly. Church groups organized prayer circles. Volunteers from out of state mailed in posters and flyers. The boys' photos were taped to street lamps, pinned on bulletin boards at gas stations, printed on shirts and bumper stickers. The phrase, "Bring the Carter twins home," became a rallying cry. But the longer they stayed missing, the more reality crept in. People had jobs to return to, lives to manage, other headlines to read. One by one, porch candles burned out and weren't relit. In public, Mary maintained grace. She thanked reporters, hugged volunteers, smiled for cameras. But behind closed doors, her pain was raw and feral. She'd wake in the middle of the night screaming their names, convinced she'd heard footsteps in the hallway. She kept their bedroom untouched, 2 beds made perfectly, soccer trophies gleaming, posters on the wall curling slightly with age. Every morning, she opened their curtains to let in the sunlight. Every night, she said goodnight to their pillows. Robert dealt with it differently. He grew angry, not at Mary, not even at the world, just at the unbearable silence that filled their home. He punched holes in the garage wall. He yelled at reporters who speculated irresponsibly. He refused to attend therapy, insisting he was fine. But he wasn't. Not even close. Together, they grieved. Apart. At school, their absence was a phantom. Teachers left their desks empty. Classmates avoided sitting near them. The principal had the idea to dedicate a bench in the courtyard. 2 names carved into polished wood beneath a small bronze plaque. But even that became a painful reminder. Some kids stopped eating lunch outside altogether. Others would leave drawings or flowers on the bench, but mostly it sat unused. Around the holidays, false hope began to seep in. An anonymous caller claimed they saw 2 boys matching the twins' description at a rest stop near the Georgia border. Another tip came in from Alabama. A psychic in Texas said the boys were alive and being kept in a basement. Police investigated each one thoroughly. None of them led anywhere. Each new lead reignited a flicker of hope. Each dead end dimmed it further. It was an exhausting cycle, one that wore down even the most optimistic. By the first anniversary of the disappearance, Mary and Robert stood in front of a small crowd at a candlelight vigil held near their church. She spoke softly, voice trembling but steady, thanking everyone for not forgetting. Robert, standing beside her with hands clenched tight, remained silent. The local news covered it briefly, but no major networks showed up. The story that once gripped the nation was beginning to fade. In the quiet aftermath of the vigil, Mary returned home and placed 2 candles on the windowsill. She lit them both, then sat in the dark and watched the flames dance. Outside, the neighborhood was silent, save for the distant sound of crickets. For her, time had stopped. She still waited for the knock on the door, the sudden phone call, the miracle headline. She refused to believe they were gone. Because no matter how much the world moved on, Mary Carter never did. Detective Avery Sanders remembered the exact moment he first saw the case file. It was late September 2009. A chilly breeze drifted through the Orlando precinct's open windows, and Sanders had just poured his second cup of coffee when the folder landed on his desk. 2 boys, 13, vanished on the way home from school. No witnesses, no clues. Sanders had seen his share of tragedies, runaways, abductions, even murder, but this one felt different from the start. It clung to him. He was 42 at the time. A decade on the force, meticulous, methodical, known for digging deeper when others gave up. He was respected, even liked, but kept a certain distance from everyone. He had no children, no spouse. Maybe that's why he poured so much of himself into the Carter case. Maybe he saw in Alex and Liam something he never had, something he was now responsible for finding. He worked late nights, lining his office wall with photos, maps, interview transcripts. He traced the twins' final route over and over again. He even biked it himself, noting every stoplight, every turn, every blind corner. The list of people he interviewed grew longer by the day. Friends, teachers, janitors, bus drivers, neighbors, ex-cons within a 5-mile radius. He interrogated known offenders, cross-referenced criminal patterns, and ran checks on every vehicle registered near the school zone. Still, nothing. One detail nagged at him more than the others. A student claimed the boys mentioned something strange in the days leading up to their disappearance, something about a man they saw more than once on their ride home. But when pressed, the kid couldn't remember specifics. Just that Liam had looked scared. That was it. Sanders followed up, looked for similar reports, asked around, but no one else remembered anything unusual. Teachers described the twins as well-adjusted, kind, quiet. No disciplinary issues, no signs of bullying or trouble. Still, Sanders couldn't shake the feeling that someone had slipped through the cracks. He kept a notebook separate from official records. In it, he wrote theories. Not facts, just instincts. One page had a rough sketch of a white van. Another had the words "followed" circled 3 times. A third page simply read, "Why no struggle?" As months dragged on, pressure from above intensified. The media painted the department as ineffective. News anchors questioned why there were no suspects. Internet forums dissected every statement he made in press conferences. Some called for him to be replaced. He didn't care. He kept working. One night in late January 2010, Sanders sat alone in his office past midnight. Rain pounded the windows. He stared at a map of Orlando covered in pins and strings, red for confirmed sightings, blue for police leads, yellow for dead ends. The board was a mess of color. Patterns were supposed to emerge. They never did. His captain called him in 2 days later. "We need to reallocate resources," the captain said. "The case is cold, Avery." "No," Sanders replied flatly. "You've done everything you can. I haven't done enough. There's nothing left." Sanders walked out of the office that day with a new clarity. Officially, the Carter file would be downgraded. Fewer hours, less manpower. Public interest was fading. But he wasn't done, not even close. He kept visiting the Carters every few weeks, giving Mary whatever small updates he could. He told her the truth when there was nothing new. She never cried in front of him, only asked if he was still looking. He always said yes. Privately, he doubled down. He started digging into older cases, wondering if the Carter twins were part of a bigger pattern. He drove to every location a tip came from, no matter how implausible. He followed up on a man who had moved out of state the day after the boys disappeared. Nothing stuck, but there was one detail he couldn't forget: the strange coincidence in the school records. Liam Carter's last library book was never returned. The Swamp Path, a local history about the wetlands surrounding Orlando. The librarian noted it had been requested twice in the same week, once by Liam, once by an unidentified student who never picked it up. Sanders made a note of it in his private log, but without more, it was another ghost trail. Still, he kept the book in his desk drawer. By the end of 2010, he'd exhausted every sanctioned method, but the case had worked its way into his bones. And even as the world forgot the Carter twins, Detective Sanders never did. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in June 2011, nearly 2 years after the twins had vanished. A plain white envelope, no return address, slid between grocery store flyers and utility bills. Mary Carter almost threw it away. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper, handwritten, no greeting, no signature. "You won't find what you're not willing to see. Swamp knows what it holds. Look where dogs stop barking. 2 names, 2 tags. Still there." Mary read it 3 times. The handwriting was tight, deliberate, unnerving. The words felt like a riddle, but her mother's instinct kicked in. This wasn't some prank. Whoever sent this knew something. She drove to the police station immediately. The front desk officer recognized her instantly and called in the duty sergeant. The letter was bagged, tagged, and sent for fingerprint analysis. A copy was given to Detective Sanders, who, despite being reassigned, still reviewed anything remotely connected to the Carter case. The letter sparked a brief internal stir. Was this real? A taunt? A desperate cry for attention? The department leaned toward hoax. No fingerprints, no saliva, nothing traceable. The paper and envelope were generic. Handwriting experts couldn't link it to any known individual, but the phrasing lingered. "Look where dogs stop barking." That line disturbed Sanders the most. He revisited reports from the original search, looking for anything referencing canine units losing a scent or acting strangely. There were notes about a section near the edge of Tosohatchee Wildlife Management Area where one dog had sat down abruptly and refused to continue. The handler had chalked it up to fatigue, and the team had moved on. Could that be what the letter referred to? Sanders pushed the theory to his former captain, but it was dismissed. The area had already been searched, and without new evidence, no resources would be allocated. The case, officially, was still cold. Mary wasn't satisfied. That night she spread out old maps on the dining table, marking areas where the dogs had been used. She made lists of wetlands, hiking paths, and forgotten trails. Her laptop became a constant companion. She scoured local forums, hunting blogs, environmental reports, anything that mentioned animal behavior near swamps. She knew the Everglades were too far south. The note had to mean somewhere nearby. Tosohatchee made the most sense. It was dense, vast, hard to search. Even in 2009, much of it had been deemed too dangerous for prolonged human access. The phrase "two tags" stood out next. Military ID tags, something else. She remembered the twins wore dog tags, not military-issued, but silver pendants with their names engraved, gifts from their grandfather. Mary had forgotten all about them, but now that memory pierced through her fog. Were those the tags the letter referred to? She brought that detail to the police, but again, it wasn't enough to justify new manpower. No physical evidence, no timeline, just speculation. So Mary started visiting the edges of the swamp herself. Insect repellent, old sneakers, bottled water. She didn't go deep, not at first. She simply walked, sometimes for hours, listening, taking photos, logging what she saw. At night, she dreamed of trees swallowing her boys whole. Word of her solo searches spread. Some neighbors said she was delusional, others whispered admiration. A few offered to join her, but she always declined. This was hers. Sanders heard about her efforts. He reached out, asked for a copy of the letter. They met at a cafe neither had been to before. She handed him a photocopy. He studied it in silence. "I think it's real," Mary said softly. "I think it's something," he replied. They didn't agree on much after that. Sanders had seen too many false leads wreck families. He didn't want to encourage her grief. But he also knew Mary Carter was not a woman easily swayed by fantasy. In the end, he promised to keep looking, unofficially, quietly. That summer, she returned to the swamp again and again. No discoveries, no signs, no proof, but she didn't stop. Because even if no one else believed the letter meant anything, Mary did. And sometimes belief is what carries you into the darkest places. By 2015, the case of Alex and Liam Carter had become a shadow. A local ghost story whispered through generations, rarely spoken aloud by those who remembered the real boys. New homes had sprung up on the edges of the Carter neighborhood, new families, new children biking to school, unaware of the silence that once swallowed 2 lives whole. The park that once hosted candlelight vigils now echoed with laughter again. Life had moved on, but not for Mary. Inside the Carter home, time remained frozen. The front porch still held the boys' worn shoes by the door. Their room, untouched. The refrigerator displayed drawings from the last week of school in 2009, colors faded but memories intact. Mary no longer opened the door for reporters. She had stopped doing interviews years ago. Public sympathy had shifted to pity and then to avoidance. Even those who once offered casseroles and comfort now crossed the street when they saw her coming. But she didn't care. Every Thursday, she drove to a small library on the east side of town, the only one that still kept microfilm records. There she pored over cold case reports, missing persons, environmental records about wetlands. Sometimes she found nothing. Sometimes she left with a name, a location, a hunch. She documented it all. 3 binders, color-coded. Red for dead ends, yellow for possible links, green for needs follow-up. Most of them were red. Meanwhile, Robert had grown quieter still. He and Mary barely spoke, sharing a house but not a life. He spent most of his time in the garage, rebuilding old radios, listening to static. Once, Mary tried asking him if he still believed the boys were alive. He didn't answer. They'd stopped attending the annual memorial. The school stopped holding them. By that point, the bench dedicated to the boys had been moved to a less trafficked part of the campus. The brass plaque was scratched, the wood warped. Students who sat on it had no idea who Alex and Liam were. But not everyone had forgotten. Jacob Keller, a childhood friend of Liam's, had just turned 19. A quiet, introverted teen, he'd carried a memory that never sat right. And finally, in his first year of community college, he decided to come forward. He called the police station, asked for someone connected to the Carter case. They patched him through to an officer who took down his statement. 2 days later, Detective Avery Sanders, still retired but still involved, got the transcript. According to Jacob, a week before the twins vanished, Liam confided in him. He said a man had been following them, not every day, not obviously, but enough to scare him. Jacob had dismissed it then, thinking Liam was just spooked. But now, looking back, he remembered more. A description. A pale man with a large scar on his cheek. A green baseball cap. Sometimes he was seen across the street after school, once parked near their bike rack. Another time, walking slowly behind them but disappearing before they could say anything. Jacob never saw the man himself, but Liam seemed genuinely afraid. He even joked about making decoys one day, something about confusing the guy if he ever got too close. That phrase stuck with Sanders. He met with Jacob personally, asked more questions, dug deeper. Jacob had no other details, just a growing guilt that he hadn't told anyone sooner. Sanders revisited old witness lists, trying to cross-reference anyone who matched that description. No matches. But he added Jacob's statement to the green binder, one of the few active ones Mary still updated weekly. Meanwhile, online forums about the case had shrunk, but a few loyal followers remained. Some proposed theories about human trafficking rings, others suspected someone from the school, and a few believed the twins had run away and started new lives under false identities. Most threads were dormant. Occasionally, a user would post any updates and receive no replies. But one theory gained subtle traction. It tied together the idea of the swamp, the silence of the dogs and the boys' own instincts. A theory that maybe, just maybe, they'd known something was coming, that they had seen something, and that someone had made sure they never spoke about it. No proof, no answers. But in the void left behind, theories were all anyone had. Avery Sanders had officially retired in 2013, but the Carter case never left his mind. Some files are closed with a final report and a deep breath. Others stay with you, carved into the parts of yourself you can't explain. For Sanders, the twins were the ones he couldn't bury. He kept the box labeled Carter Twins in his garage, far from the official records now sealed and archived by the department. Inside, printed photos, copies of school maps, pages from interviews, and his personal notebooks, full of speculation, dates, and unanswered questions. In the spring of 2024, while clearing space to install new shelving, Sanders pulled that box down. Dust rose. The edges were frayed. He hadn't opened it in nearly a year. One folder caught his eye. It was unmarked, its contents thin, just a few sheets of paper and a faded, sticky note. He frowned. It was a misplaced internal memo from 2010, likely sorted wrong. Behind it, a smaller notebook, one he didn't recognize at first. The cover read, Personal A.S. Inside, his own handwriting. Among the entries was one that stopped him cold. A rough sketch of a trailhead, trees, a fork in the path, a circle around what he labeled Dog Stop Point. Next to it, a phrase he had underlined twice, Swamp Entry. Dog refused. He had forgotten about this detail. He cross-referenced the drawing with an old search area map he kept pinned to his office wall. It was a region near the northeastern edge of Tosohatchee, a swamp basin just outside the original search perimeter, marked off back then for being unstable after heavy rainfall. Sanders stared at the coordinates. His fingers tingled. He turned to his computer and pulled up recent satellite images of the area. Overgrowth, no trails, still remote, still wild. His pulse quickened. He knew what this meant. An area once passed over, unsearchable due to flooding, dismissed quickly as a dead end. But the memory of that line from the letter Mary received, "Look where dogs stop barking," came rushing back. It fit. That night, he called Mary. He hadn't spoken to her directly in nearly 6 months. She answered on the third ring, voice cautious but curious. "I found something," Sanders said. There was a long pause. "What kind of something?" "Coordinates. A place we missed." "Official?" "No, just me." "I want to see it," she said. No hesitation. He asked her to wait, said he needed to go first, check it out himself, make sure there was something worth revisiting. Mary didn't argue, but he could hear the hope rising in her voice like a tide she couldn't stop. The next morning, Sanders packed a field kit, flashlight, portable GPS, water, notebook, gloves. He called in a favor from a contact at Florida Fish and Wildlife to get a back gate key. Then he drove 2 hours east past the highway, through back roads, into the wilderness. The air grew thick with heat and pollen. The trees pressed close. The deeper he went, the more the sounds changed. Birds above, insects below, silence in between. He reached the site by early afternoon. The GPS marked the spot exactly. He stepped out, heart pounding. The path was overgrown, almost invisible now, but it matched his sketch. He walked slowly, carefully. The trail faded. The terrain sloped downward into soft mud. Dragonflies buzzed past his ears. Every step pulled at his boots. Then something caught his eye. Beneath a collapsed patch of vines and leaves, half submerged in the muck, was a metal object, rusted, round, unnatural. He crouched, pulled gently. A bike frame, twisted, decayed, coated in grime, but unmistakable, children's size. The shape of the handlebars still visible. Sanders froze. He took photos, marked the spot, backed away slowly, his hands trembling. Then he called the sheriff's office. For the first time in 15 years, there was something tangible. Not a theory, not a memory. Something real. And somewhere nearby, the swamp held more. The discovery of the bike frame didn't make national headlines. Not yet. But within the local sheriff's office, the air changed. Avery Sanders stood at the edge of the swamp trail as deputies combed the area with metal detectors and handheld scanners. The humidity clung to their clothes. Mosquitoes swarmed. Still, no one complained. They had something now. The bike was bagged and taken for analysis. Initial visual comparison matched it with the Carter twins' make and model from 2009. Chrome frame, blue grips, a sticker from a local shop long out of business. Rust and plant overgrowth made immediate confirmation difficult, but the shape was unmistakable. That alone was enough to justify expanding the search zone. The Tosohatchee Wildlife Management Area sprawled across 30,000 acres of tangled forest, dense swampland, and barely marked trails. It had always been dangerous to search extensively, especially in the years immediately after the disappearance. But times had changed. Technology had improved. Drones, thermal cameras, GPS grid coordination. Within 48 hours, a coordinated search team was deployed. Mary Carter was notified but asked not to come, at least not yet. The area was unstable, the ground soft, full of sinkholes and animal burrows. She agreed reluctantly, instead following every update by phone. The operation was slow. Volunteers were not permitted this time, only trained professionals, rangers, deputies. Forensic techs. They moved carefully, methodically, logging every item of interest, flagging coordinates and mapping progress. Sanders, though unofficial, was granted access. He moved with the team, but always slightly apart, drawn by something deeper than protocol. 2 days into the search, another find. Roughly 30 yards from the bike, under a moss-covered log, partially submerged in black water, they found fabric, faded, torn but still bearing color. A navy blue patch, a fragment of a zipper. It matched the school backpack uniform worn by the twins. Further down, a broken strap, then a shoe, small canvas missing its sole. Sanders felt his chest tighten. Then someone called out. Buried beneath a layer of muck, tangled in roots, they unearthed a small zippered pouch. It had eroded edges, the metal pieces warped by time and water. Inside were several small objects, mostly unidentifiable debris, until one glinted. A silver tag. Then another. They were ID tags, dog tags, not military, not standard issue. Just smooth, simple silver plates with two names engraved in fading black, Liam Carter, Alex Carter. Silence fell over the swamp. No cheers, no gasps, just the weight of it. The tags were carefully lifted, placed into protective evidence containers, and logged with timestamps, GPS coordinates, and chain of custody documentation. It was the first confirmed personal belonging from either twin recovered since 2009. The next step was verification, DNA swabs, comparison against records, metallurgical analysis. But no one doubted their authenticity. Mary had described the tags in detail over a decade ago, how they jingled when the boys ran, how she had each one engraved as a birthday gift. Word spread quickly. Local media picked up the story first, then regional. By day 3, national outlets were circling. Breaking, new evidence uncovered in 2009. Carter twins' disappearance flashed across screens. Mary Carter sat in her living room, watching the coverage unfold with trembling hands. The tags displayed on screen broke her open. She cried until her voice gave out. Robert sat silently beside her, eyes locked on the screen. For the first time in years, they sat close enough to touch. Sanders gave a press statement later that afternoon. "This is a significant discovery," he said. "We now know the boys were here. This confirms a lead that was missed years ago. We will not stop until we know the full story." Reporters pressed him. Was this now a criminal investigation? Were there suspects? He refused to speculate, but internally questions were swirling. Why here? Why had it taken 15 years for these items to be found? Who, if anyone, had brought them here? Or worse, had the boys come willingly? Sanders didn't voice that thought aloud. Not yet. Because in the silence of the swamp, the past had finally begun to speak. The discovery of the dog tag sparked a storm of media attention. Within hours, national networks dispatched reporters to Orlando. The story, dormant for 15 years, was suddenly everywhere. News trucks lined the road outside the sheriff's office. Commentators revisited old footage, re-interviewed aging detectives, replayed clips from the tearful vigils of 2009. The Carter twins were back in the public eye, no longer as a tragedy left behind, but as a mystery reawakened. DNA tests confirmed what no one doubted. The tags belonged to Alex and Liam. Each tag bore traces of sweat and skin oil, enough to extract partial DNA. Forensic analysts matched them with samples from the twins' baby teeth, which Mary had saved and handed over years ago. It was irrefutable. The swamp had held them, but where were the boys? No remains. No clothing beyond the backpack scrap, no bones, no sign of a struggle, just the items, left behind in eerily deliberate condition. It didn't feel like nature had scattered them. It felt like someone had placed them. That detail unsettled everyone. The sheriff, now a different man from the one who had signed off on ending the search in 2010, held a press conference. This investigation is now active and open. We are re-examining every piece of original evidence, and we encourage anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. The community response was mixed. Some people wept at the news, attending pop-up vigils outside the Carter home. Others whispered that they always knew the boys hadn't run away, that the swamp held secrets nobody wanted to admit. But most were simply stunned. After so long, they had stopped believing anything would ever surface. For Mary, the validation brought a strange relief. She stood in her kitchen, the dog tags in a sealed evidence bag beside her, and whispered thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just into the silence. She held the bag like it might break, her fingers trembling as she traced the faint imprint of the names. Then she turned to the one person she knew would listen. She called Sanders. He answered immediately. "They were there," she said. "I know. Do you think—" She stopped. "Do you think they were alive when they got there?" There was a pause on the line. Then, quietly, "I don't know." The search resumed the next day, wider and deeper. New cadaver dogs were brought in, soil samples taken, crews drained water pockets and sifted through debris, drones scanned tree canopies, while divers waded into chest-high bogs. Nothing else was found, at least not immediately, but patterns emerged. A cluster of depressions in the mud, vaguely circular, evenly spaced, old but unnatural. Forensic geologists were brought in. They suggested the impressions could be remnants of makeshift camp structures, perhaps tents or temporary posts anchored in the soft earth. Nearby, a tree bore an odd mark, 3 vertical slashes, weathered but visible, 6 feet off the ground. A ranger said it looked like it had been carved with a knife. It wasn't enough to draw conclusions, but it shifted the tone. This wasn't just a dumping site, it might have been a place of passage, maybe even a hideout. Which led Sanders to wonder, if the boys were taken here, had someone else lived here too? No footprints, no tools, just subtle traces of disruption, like someone had tried to erase their presence but left behind shadows. The FBI offered support. A behavioral analyst reviewed the case file and the site details. Her profile suggested a person familiar with wilderness terrain, solitary, possibly with military or survivalist background, someone capable of disappearing. But without a name, it meant nothing. Back in town, Mary and Robert met privately with the sheriff. They were shown all the recovered items. The sheriff's tone was measured, respectful but guarded. He explained what they had, what it could mean and what it didn't yet answer. Robert asked only one question. "Are you looking for a killer?" The sheriff paused. "We're looking for whoever was responsible." That was enough. In the coming days, the area around the discovery site was closed off to the public. Law enforcement presence intensified. For the first time in over a decade, people whispered that answers might finally come. But the swamp kept its silence, and the truth for now stayed buried just beneath the surface. The swamp had given up a clue, but not the full story. Investigators were left with a haunting question. Were the twins brought there, or did they go willingly? That's when the recovered pouch changed everything. During the evidence processing, a technician noticed pages pressed together in the bottom seam of the pouch, tightly folded, water-damaged, and nearly illegible. After gentle drying and infrared scanning, 3 pages emerged. Handwriting, pencil, faded, but there. It was a journal, partial, fragmented, written in different hands. Most of it was incoherent, affected by moisture and time. But key lines stood out, scraps of thoughts, emotions, observations, enough to send shivers down the spine. "We sleep in turns now. No more trail lights, too risky. He's out there, still watching. Liam says we can't go back. He's probably right." There was mention of hunger, of cold, of listening for footsteps. 1 page listed dates, though the year was missing. Another had sketches of what appeared to be tree markings and a rough path. But the most chilling line of all came on the final legible page. "The collector comes at night. We don't move. We don't breathe." The phrase, "the collector," was unfamiliar to the investigators, but it sparked immediate attention. Sanders received a call from the sheriff's office and was given permission to examine the pages. He read them slowly more than once, piecing together tone, context, patterns. He had no doubt. This was written by the boys, and it changed the narrative entirely. These weren't just victims of a quick abduction. They had survived for some time, days, maybe even weeks in the swamp. They had hidden. They had feared someone, and they had a name for him, the collector. Sanders dove into the archives. The name triggered something in the back of his mind. He remembered an old rumor from early in the case, dismissed at the time, about a local urban legend. Kids on online forums had mentioned the collector as a cautionary tale. A figure who roamed swamps watching children, taking only those who strayed too far. It had been laughed off. A ghost story, nothing actionable. Now it felt different. He searched again, this time deeper, beyond police records. He scoured public records, folklore forums, digitized newsprint from small-town publications. He found one article from 1992, buried in a local newsletter from Orange County. It told the story of a boy who went missing for 2 days near Tosohachi, only to return in a daze. He never spoke of what happened, only saying the night man had let him go. Later that same year, a hunter reported hearing children's voices deep in the swamp where no one lived. And then, silence. No follow-up. No investigations. Sanders brought these findings to the sheriff, who remained cautious. "We're dealing with facts, not folklore," he said. But Sanders pressed on, arguing that every myth had a seed of truth. They interviewed swamp locals, older residents, trail rangers, environmental workers. Many had never heard of the collector. A few had. An elderly man named Emmett, who had worked trail maintenance for decades, spoke softly as he recalled hearing stories in the 80s and 90s. "Not a man, really," he said, "more like a whisper. Kids gone missing, families leaving town quiet-like. You hear things in these woods, ain't all animals." It wasn't evidence, but it wasn't nothing. Sanders compiled a psychological profile with the help of the FBI analyst. If someone had been living in the swamp for decades, avoiding detection, preying on children, they would need to be highly intelligent, deeply disturbed, and capable of surviving in total isolation. They would also have to know the terrain intimately, well enough to stay hidden from helicopters, search dogs, and rangers. And perhaps they had watched those searches happen. That thought chilled Sanders more than anything. He returned to the journal pages again. Each word felt heavier now. Every scratch of pencil told a story of fear, of survival, of hope running thin. The idea that the twins had lived, had written, meant they had tried, fought, outwitted something for a time. But ultimately something or someone had ended their journey, and that someone had a name: the Collector. The next lead came from a rumor buried in a ranger's logbook from 2007, 2 years before the twins vanished. It referenced an unmarked hunting lodge deep within the eastern edge of Tosohachi. The entry was vague. Old shack, NW quadrant, collapsed roof. Noted signs of previous occupancy. Traps, cans, disturbed soil, no wildlife present. It had been logged as a safety hazard and left at that. But now, with the journal referencing the Collector and signs suggesting someone had possibly lived in the swamp undetected, that old report took on new weight. Sanders brought it to the sheriff's attention, and a specialized search team was dispatched. The location was over 4 miles from the nearest trail. It took hours to reach, even with GPS and machetes cutting through undergrowth. The air grew heavier as they approached, mosquitoes thick, the smell of decay sharp and constant. Few sounds, except the distant creak of branches and the occasional splash in muddy water. Then they saw it. Half buried in vines and rot, a low wooden structure slumped between trees. The roof had collapsed in sections, mold and moss blanketed the exterior. But the door still stood, slightly ajar, the hinges rusted but intact. Inside, it was worse. The lodge had a single room roughly 15 by 15 feet. A metal-framed cot lay crooked in one corner, its mattress rotted through. Nearby, a small stove sat rusted shut, surrounded by cans of expired food. Plastic containers lined the walls, some still filled with tools, wires, nails. A lantern with dried fuel, a water container, empty. But that wasn't what froze the team. In the far corner, barely visible under layers of dust and filth, were chains bolted into the floor. 2 sets, short length, heavy iron. Next to them, gouges in the wood, scratches, claw-like, as if someone had tried to escape. A ranger stepped outside and vomited. The air inside grew thinner with every breath. Forensics marked the chains, the scratches, the containers. Everything was photographed, bagged, documented. The shack was treated as an active crime scene. No one spoke above a whisper. Then came the bones. Near the stove, behind a broken crate, a pile of charred debris was discovered. Initially dismissed as firewood, a closer look revealed fragments, small bones, some whole, some broken. Not animal. Too small. Human. A forensic anthropologist on scene examined the remains. Based on size and condition, they likely belonged to children. No full skeletons, no skulls. Just fragments, phalanges, ribs, vertebrae. Sanders stood outside, the late afternoon sun bleeding through the canopy above. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply looked at the structure and felt the breath go out of him. This place was real, and someone had used it. Nearby, another officer called out. He had found something under the floorboards, a loose plank revealing a cavity beneath. Inside, a box wrapped in plastic. The box held dozens of items, photos. Most were damaged, curled at the edges but still visible. Children, different ages, different decades, not just the Carters, boys, girls, some smiling, some crying, all photographed in dim lighting. There were also notebooks filled with cramped handwriting, diagrams, maps, rituals, instructions, and a name. Written repeatedly on several pages, V. Hale. It was the first real identity they had. They searched public records, combed databases, hunted down aliases. Vernon Hale. Born 1962, former groundskeeper at a nearby botanical preserve. Disappeared in 2010. No family. Prior arrest in 1984 for trespassing and stalking. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in his 20s. Lived off the grid for most of his adult life. Neighbors described him as quiet but strange. He collected dead animals, talked to himself, built traps in the woods. Police had interviewed him during the original Carter investigation. He lived within a few miles of the boys' school, but with no evidence linking him to the disappearance and no known vehicle, he was never followed up on. Until now. In his journals he wrote of preserving purity, of cleansing the outside world, of taking only the ones who wandered. He referred to the swamp as the sanctuary, and the lodge, he called it the archive. The implications were horrifying. Whoever Vernon Hale had been, he was no longer a legend, he was real. He had lived among the shadows, and in the deepest parts of Florida's wilderness, he had created something monstrous. And now the hunt for truth had a face. The name Vernon Hale sent a tremor through the investigation. For years he had been a ghost in the background of police files, a forgotten footnote. Now, with evidence pulled from a decaying shack deep in the swamp, he became the prime suspect in one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in Florida history. The FBI launched a full background analysis. Born in 1962, Vernon Hale had a long, troubled history. His mother died during his birth. His father, an alcoholic, raised him in isolation in northern Florida, before vanishing when Vernon was 16. From there, his life fractured. Short stints in shelters, a criminal trespassing charge, institutionalization in a state psychiatric facility, then release and disappearance. Hale left almost no digital footprint, no bank account, no license, no phone. He existed in the margins, doing odd jobs, living in abandoned properties, trapping animals, avoiding people. By the early 2000s, he had drifted to the rural zones around Orange County, blending in with the forgotten corners of central Florida. No one knew how long he had been in Tozohatchee, but based on his journals, authorities believed he had lived there for at least a decade, possibly more. The contents of those journals were deeply unsettling. Hundreds of entries, written in disjointed language, detailed his philosophy of collection. He saw the swamp as sacred ground, a place beyond corruption. He believed the world outside was infected, impure. Children to him represented untouched life, vulnerable and unspoiled. He referred to himself not as a predator, but as a guardian. In one entry dated mid-2009 he wrote, "Saw the Mirror Boys again, same path, same rhythm. They belong. They know it too." That line sent chills through the entire task force. The Mirror Boys, Alex and Liam. Twins, identical, vulnerable. And in Hale's deluded worldview, they were not victims. They were chosen. Forensics found further damning evidence inside the shack. Tucked beneath a loose board, Wrapped in cloth were scraps of the twins' clothing, a torn patch from Liam's favorite jacket, a faded bracelet Mary remembered Alex wearing every day. Hair samples were recovered. Some matched the twins' DNA. Others belonged to unidentified individuals, possibly other victims. That possibility shook investigators to their core. Sanders reviewed every cold case of missing children within a 200-mile radius over the last 25 years. Dozens of cases fit the profile. Boys and girls aged 7 to 14 vanished without a trace, most near rural or wooded areas. Some were never connected to any suspect. Now all eyes turned to Hale. But there was one complication. No one had seen Vernon Hale since 2010. He had simply disappeared. No sightings, no records, no evidence he had died, but also no proof he had left the area. The last known photo was a DMV ID issued in 1996. He would be in his early 60s today, if alive. The sheriff released his photo to the public. Hotlines lit up. Dozens of tips flooded in, most from outside Florida. None panned out, but one stood out. A woman in Flagler County claimed she had seen a man matching Hale's description near a rest stop 5 years prior. The man had been rummaging through a trash bin, limping, muttering to himself, and vanished before she could approach. The timeline fit. If Hale was alive, he had stayed hidden longer than anyone imagined. If he was dead, where was his body? Searches of the swamp resumed, but the terrain worked against them. Rain washed away evidence. Sinkholes collapsed potential grave sites. Wildlife scattered remains. The truth was, Hale might never be found. But the story had changed forever. The Carter twins had not simply vanished. They had been targeted, watched, taken, and left in the care of a man who believed he was saving them. Mary Carter was shown photos from the shack. She identified the bracelet, the jacket scrap. She didn't speak for several minutes. Then she asked just one thing. "Can you find out how long they were alive?" The question sat in the room like a wound. Investigators didn't have an answer. Forensic decay, journal timelines, and diary fragments suggested the boys had survived for days, maybe weeks. But no more. The horror of that possibility lingered. That Alex and Liam had held on, that they had written, that they had waited for help, and that it never came. 2 weeks after the discovery of the shack, a deeper search revealed something investigators hadn't expected. 50 yards behind the lodge, partially camouflaged under earth and vegetation, they found a hatch. Metal circular, covered in rust and mildew. It took 2 officers and a crowbar to pry it open. Beneath it was a narrow entrance to a subterranean chamber. The air inside was damp and foul. A single set of metal steps led down into a space no larger than a small garage. The walls were reinforced with scrap wood and plastic sheeting, a makeshift bunker. Inside, the evidence was overwhelming. A folding cot, a generator, old canned food, blank VHS tapes, a stack of notebooks, and in the far corner, a cabinet sealed shut with padlocks. It took hours for the forensics team to catalogue the room, documenting every inch, every fingerprint, every hair fibre. When the cabinet was opened, what they found shifted the case from horrific to monstrous. Hundreds of labelled tapes, each with a date, each with a name. Many names were unknown. Some matched unsolved missing persons cases, but near the top of the pile were 2 labels written in faded ink: Alex, entry day, Liam, day 3. The contents of those tapes were never released to the public. Authorities described them only as deeply disturbing documentation of psychological manipulation and isolation. The videos showed that the Carter twins had been held in the shack, and possibly in the bunker, for an extended period of time. They appeared frightened but unharmed in early footage. As days passed, the recordings captured their slow withdrawal, their survival attempts, and their increasing awareness that no one was coming. The tapes ended abruptly. No recordings of escape, no visible death, just silence. That silence spoke volumes. Sanders reviewed the footage alone before submitting a summary report to the FBI. When he emerged, his face was pale, expression hollow. He didn't speak for hours. Forensic teams scoured the bunker for additional clues. They found wiring for old surveillance cameras, batteries, discarded medication bottles with Hale's name, and pages from what appeared to be his manifesto. In those writings, Hale described his methods. He had studied the school, chosen the boys for their symmetry. The mirror twins, as he called them. He believed they held a unique balance of spirit, a purity he could preserve. He stalked them for weeks, learned their schedule, waited. On the day they disappeared, Hale used a back road to intercept them. There was no struggle, no witnesses. He had created a blind spot, timed the moment perfectly, and from there he vanished into the forest he knew better than anyone. His final entries showed cracks in his thinking, paranoia, hallucinations, references to outside forces and corrupted watchers. He believed the world was watching him through the trees. He burned pages, hid others, buried some, though their locations were unknown. Back in Orlando, Mary Carter was informed of the tapes. She declined to view them. All she wanted to know was one thing: were they together? Sanders answered softly, "Yes, almost the entire time." She closed her eyes and nodded. That's what matters. Public reaction was swift and visceral. News outlets called it one of the darkest child abduction cases in modern history. Analysts debated the psychological profile of Hale, the systemic failure of law enforcement, and the limits of search capabilities. Parents nationwide grieved. Schools introduced new safety protocols. State officials launched reviews into cold case procedures. For the Carter family, none of it mattered. They had answers now. Not justice, not peace, but truth. And even that came with a cost. The lodge and bunker were demolished under court order. The area was declared a crime scene, then permanently closed to the public. A memorial plaque was installed at the edge of the trail, bearing the names of Alex and Liam, and the quiet words, "They fought to be found." Investigators continued to search for other victims listed in Hale's records. Some names remained mysteries. Others led to reopened cases across state lines. Vernon Hale had left a trail spanning years, maybe decades, but no one knew how it had ended. His body was never found. His legacy, however, would never be forgotten. Because in a swamp forgotten by time, two boys had written their story, and the world had finally read it. Mary Carter didn't want to be a symbol. For years she had fought in silence, haunted by what-ifs, sustained only by the stubborn belief that her boys deserved to be found. When the world moved on, she stayed. When the voices faded, she whispered their names, and when the truth finally came, she didn't celebrate. She wept. Then she stood. In the weeks following the bunker discovery, Mary did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She spoke publicly, not to the press, but to parents, to schools, to local leaders. She gave quiet talks at libraries, small conferences, church halls. She didn't tell the full story. She didn't need to. She talked about patterns, about listening to children, about trusting instinct when no one else does. People listened. One night, after speaking at a high school vigil for another missing teen, she was approached by a mother. The woman clutched her hand and said, "You didn't just keep their memory alive, you made sure they were seen. You made us all look again." That night Mary went home and began drafting the plans for something she had only imagined during long, hopeless nights. A non-profit, the Carter Foundation for the Missing. Its mission was simple: support families of missing children, raise awareness for long cold cases, and pressure local authorities to revisit incomplete investigations. Within a month they had volunteers, within 3 months donations. Within 6 they launched a national hotline and partnered with forensic analysts and cold case researchers across 5 states. The foundation's logo was 2 mirrored trees, roots intertwined. In interviews, Mary rarely mentioned the twins by name, but everyone knew, and her presence carried a weight few could ignore. Robert remained behind the scenes. He helped with logistics, fundraising events, the day-to-day work. Though their marriage had suffered unspeakable trauma, they found in the foundation a shared purpose, a space between pain and legacy where they could exist together again, even if just briefly. By early 2025, the Carter Foundation had assisted in the reopening of 7 cold cases and provided legal aid to over 30 families. One missing girl was located alive in Ohio. 2 others were identified through DNA matches. Each success brought bittersweet joy. Mary kept a candle on her desk for each recovered child. Some burned brightly, others only briefly, but each flame mattered. The twins' case continued to shape public discourse. State legislators introduced the Carter Protocols, a set of measures requiring law enforcement to re-evaluate search perimeters in missing children cases every 72 hours, using evolving environmental and technological data. It also required departments to retain cold case evidence in active rotation every 2 years, and to allow limited access to verified third-party investigators under supervision. The bill passed unanimously. For Mary, that vote wasn't just policy, it was proof that silence could be broken. Later that year, the city of Orlando announced plans for a permanent memorial. Not just for Alex and Liam, but for all children still missing across the country. The chosen location was a section of Pine Hollow Park, near where the twins once played. The centerpiece would be a sculpture, 2 figures standing back to back, one looking outward, one looking homeward. Around the base, names etched in steel of every missing child whose family had chosen to be included. Mary was invited to the unveiling. She stood quietly as city leaders spoke, reporters snapped photos, and community members laid flowers. When it was her turn to speak, she paused for a long moment, eyes fixed on the statue. Then she said simply, "They were never just names on a poster. They were laughter. They were light. And even in darkness, they remained whole." Applause followed. Tears too. And yet, beyond the cameras and speeches, the real legacy lived elsewhere, in the email inboxes filled with new tips, in the volunteers knocking on doors, in the mother who now knew what to ask when something didn't feel right. Mary returned home that evening to a quiet house. She lit 2 candles in the window and watched them flicker. Outside, children's laughter echoed faintly from the park. Life continued, but this time it carried the echo of something more, not just grief, but purpose. In early spring of 2025, search teams made a final pass through the northern fringe of Tosohatchee, an area previously flooded and inaccessible. The weather had shifted. Dry season brought lower water levels, revealing terrain hidden for years. The operation was quiet, low profile. Few expected anything more. But then came the call. A search dog stopped at a shallow depression beneath a fallen tree. The soil had been disturbed, though time and elements had tried to cover it. Forensics confirmed it quickly. This was not natural erosion. It was a grave. 2, in fact, side by side. Bones, carefully wrapped in remnants of cloth, lay curled beneath the earth. Forensic archaeologists handled the excavation with reverence. They took days, documenting each movement, each layer. No haste, no shortcuts. What they uncovered were 2 sets of small human remains, both incomplete, but intact enough to identify age and sex, both consistent with adolescent males roughly 13 years old, and both positioned with their heads facing west, an intentional orientation. Dental records, DNA samples, and prior bone fragment comparisons confirmed what no one wanted to say aloud, but already knew. Alex and Liam Carter had been found. Word reached Mary and Robert privately. They were not told gruesome details, only that the boys had been buried with care. That the graves were shallow, but the positioning was peaceful. That in some way whoever had done this had not abandoned them without ritual. Mary didn't cry when she heard. She sat still for a long time, her hands folded in her lap. Then she whispered, "Bring them home." Preparations for the funeral began quietly. No press, no cameras. Just family, friends, and those who had never stopped searching. The service was held on a grey morning in late March. Hundreds gathered. Teachers, neighbors, detectives, classmates now grown. Many had never met the twins, but felt like they had known them their entire lives. 2 caskets stood side by side beneath a canopy of oak trees. Flowers surrounded them. Sunflowers, lilies, the boys' favorites, remembered through stories their mother had repeated year after year. Mary spoke first. Her voice trembled, but never broke. "I spent 15 years begging for a miracle," she said. "But today, I thank God for something even greater, for truth, for light, for knowing where my sons rest. They were brave. They were strong. And now they are home." Robert followed. His words were brief. They didn't vanish, they didn't run, they were taken, but they were never forgotten. He placed 2 photographs on the caskets, school pictures from the last year they were alive. Both boys smiling, unaware of what lay ahead. Detective Sanders stood silently in the back row. When it was over, he walked to the graves and placed a folded note between the flowers. It read, "You were never a file. You were always real." After the burial, the community gathered in the park near the Carter Memorial. Children played on swings. Adults shared memories. A string quartet played softly near the statue. In the weeks that followed, the story returned to national media. But this time not as a tragedy unfinished. This time, it was a story of resolution. Justice would never be served in the way many hoped. Vernon Hale remained a phantom. No body, no final proof of death. But the legacy of his crimes would live on as a warning, and the faces of Alex and Liam would be etched into a nation's memory. The Carter Foundation saw a surge in support. Letters poured in, donations doubled. Volunteers signed up from every state. Families with missing loved ones reached out, sharing their stories, their photos, their pain. Mary responded to every letter personally, handwriting replies late at night by candlelight. For her, closure wasn't a finish line, it was a beginning. The boys' remains were cremated per Mary's wishes and placed in twin urns that sat side by side on her mantel. She lit a candle for them each evening. She still talked to them, still said goodnight, but now she said it with peace. The search was over. Alex and Liam were finally home. 15 years after their disappearance, Alex and Liam Carter became more than the faces on a poster. They became a legacy. Their story, once a cold case buried in bureaucratic dust, reshaped how communities, investigators, and families viewed missing children, not as statistics, but as lives, real, vivid, unfinished. In the quiet weeks following the burial, something began to shift. Schools across Florida held assemblies about child safety, not the usual generic talks, but personal, heartfelt discussions. Students were taught how to speak up, how to look out for one another. A sense of responsibility took root. Parents, too, became more attentive. Conversations deepened. Fears were acknowledged instead of dismissed. In a small classroom in Jacksonville, a girl raised her hand and said, "We should tell someone if we feel weird walking home." And no one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. They listened, because now they understood. The Carter Foundation expanded beyond its modest beginnings. It offered workshops, funded rapid response technologies, and provided legal advocates for families navigating the impossible. It became a national network of hope, not just for the missing, but for the ones who refused to stop searching. Mary Carter remained its heart. She never sought the spotlight. When people praised her strength, she responded, "It wasn't strength. It was love with nowhere else to go." Robert stepped into a quieter role, managing logistics and mentoring other grieving fathers. Together, they showed what it meant to endure. The final chapter of the twins' journey was not written in sorrow, but in momentum. 1 year after their remains were found, a special event was held at the Pine Hollow Memorial. Families from across the country attended. Survivors of abduction shared their stories, lawmakers pledged resources, and children played near the sculpture that bore Alex and Liam's names. At sunset, 2 lanterns were released into the sky. They rose slowly, caught the wind, and drifted upward, carrying with them the weight of a decade and a half of waiting. Mary watched them fade into the clouds. Behind her, a small boy tugged at her coat and asked, "Were they heroes?" She smiled gently. "They were brothers," she said, "and they never gave up." The moment passed, quiet and sacred. Months later, Sanders retired for the second time, this time for good. He declined interviews, never wrote a book, never signed a contract. He simply returned home, stored away the final box marked Carter case, and let himself rest. But every year on September 14th, he mailed a single letter to the foundation. No signature, just 5 words. I still remember their names. And in homes across the country, so did countless others. Because the Carter twins taught something no report ever could, that even in the face of silence, neglect, and failure, the truth can still rise. That love doesn't fade with time. And that some stories, no matter how dark, can still end with light. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We share real stories that deserve to be told, stories of loss, discovery, and the quiet power of human resilience, and don't stop here. Click on the video on screen now to watch another incredible case, one where justice came decades late, but not too late to matter. Because as long as someone remembers, the story isn't over.